The woman had put on a sexy blouse. She wanted to surprise her husband in the room. She didn't realize that her husband was playing a game with his lover. The wife stood still for several seconds. She couldn't figure out how she was inferior to her lover. But before she came, the bodyguards outside the door had been listening to her with dry mouths. They were shoving gum into their mouths one after another. At this moment, no one would have thought that the woman and the bodyguard would have a spark later on. The woman's name is Oh Won-soo. She's the wife of a famous Korean plutocrat. She's also a goodwill ambassador for South Korea. She spoke at a conference to expose the inhumane behavior of certain countries in waging war and the horrors of the survivors. She appealed to the Board of Governors for help and condemned those who destroy peace. But as soon as the council ended, the secretary rushed to report, "The United States has sent a threatening email. If we continue to condemn, we will launch a beheading operation." The secretary advised careful consideration. If necessary, cancel the next step of the trip. However, Won-soo was not scared. She ordered the secretary to disclose the itinerary. On the other hand, Seo Do-yoon accidentally found out during his investigation. A colleague's death was linked to a killer named Bang Bang. 3 months ago, his colleague died in a case. The only clue is the killer's words. "The flowers have been delivered to the florist." So Do-yoon quietly investigated for 3 months. Finally, he got a clue. A few days later, when Won-soo arrived at the hotel, a sniper was aiming at her from across the street. When Do-yoon heard the sound, he felt that the sniper was the killer. He immediately reacted and had to protect Won-soo, so he fought back. He escorted Won-soo away from the scene. The two of them got into Won-soo's car. I don't know how far they drove. They didn't stop until it smoked and broke down. When Do-yoon was repairing the car, he realized that there was a global positioning device in front of the engine. That means they're not out of danger yet. So they suggested to go to his house to hide for a while. They arrived at Do-yoon's house in a flash. Do-yoon told Won-soo to contact someone she trusts, but he must not reveal his location. After settling down, he went to the bathroom to treat his wounds. He washed the blood off his body, but he couldn't put a bandage on it. When Won-soo saw this, Won-soo immediately got up and helped him to treat the wound. And Do-yoon took out a wet towel and wiped the blood off Won-soo's face. The scene changes and Won-soo is sent to the South Korean consulate. Her husband was very excited when he got the news. At the same time, the 4-star security chief went to the consulate to find out what happened. He found out that the witness was Do-yoon. "We met with him that night. They were colleagues before the accident. I didn't expect him to mention the flower store in our conversation." The next day, Won-soo held a press conference. She disclosed the threatening email from the US. However, this behavior caused her mother-in-law's displeasure. In the evening, in order to thank the people who had contributed, Mr. and Mrs. Won-soo organized a party. Just as they were about to attend, her husband introduced her to the new bodyguard, Do-yoon. They just looked at each other without recognizing each other. The scene changes. Won-soo accidentally found her husband playing games with another woman, but she didn't get angry. Instead, she told her lover to pay attention to the occasion. It would be a big deal if a reporter outside captured it. Afterwards, she even went to a charity party with her husband hand in hand. They danced in front of the guests. At night, her mother-in-law called Won-soo to her room. She threw the newspaper behind her. Seeing her bossy behavior, she didn't say anything. She threw the cup in her hand onto the floor, and then she didn't feel angry enough, so she pushed all the glasses on the bar. She didn't understand that dropping things didn't make her feel better. Why did Granny still do it? Won-soo asked her mother-in-law if she knew her son was cheating on her, but she replied that she already knew. In fact, all this was arranged by her mother-in-law. She wanted Won-soo to divorce her son, but she couldn't get rid of Won-soo. Won-soo warned her not to think of the group. If she is forced to divorce, Granny won't be able to rest in peace either. It's obvious that Won-soo has something on her mother-in-law. The scene changes and Won-soo is drinking to drown her sorrows. Without realizing it, she's a little drunk. Do-yoon, who was passing by, saw him. Generally speaking, as a bodyguard, he shouldn't mind his own business, but he couldn't stop worrying about it. So he went back. At that moment, Won-soo came out of the restaurant. When Do-yoon saw her slumping, he went to help her, but Won-soo didn't pay any attention to him. She went to the elevator in a daze, but the moment the door closed, Won-soo opened the elevator door again. She looked at Do-yoon in front of her and her intentions were obvious. Do-yoon hesitated for a few seconds and stepped into the elevator. Then he moved Won-soo's hand down. The two of them went straight to the room door without a word. At that moment, the room card fell on the floor. In fact, Do-yoon didn't mean to take advantage of the situation. He just wanted to escort Won-soo back to her room safely. Just when he was about to leave, there was a knock on the door. It's Won-soo's husband. He accidentally found the room card left by the door. He was about to bend down to pick it up. The security chief suddenly appeared. He said that Mrs. Won-soo had drunk too much wine and had fallen asleep. Hearing this, Won-soo's husband left unhappily, and the two people in the house were really relieved. Time flies and all the activities are over. Do-yoon followed the security team back to the villa in Seoul. While they were chatting, a female bodyguard came in and said that Won-soo wanted to see Do-yoon. Do-yoon packed up his things and was about to go. He accidentally knocked over the photos he took with his colleague. He remembered that his colleague had mentioned something about photos. When he examined the photos, He accidentally found a flash drive. There were 3 videos on the flash drive. It seems to be related to the dead chairman. Do-yoon found Won-soo at once. He told her that someone was trying to get rid of her, and they are very professional. Won-soo doesn't believe in speculation. She wants him to prove it. Do-yoon had to admit that he didn't save her by accident. A colleague of his was killed abroad, and the assassin and the terrorist attacker are the same person. Won-soo doesn't want to talk anymore. She got up and wanted to leave, but Do-yoon held her back. He told her not to trust anyone around her, so that he can protect Won-soo better. 2 years ago, Do-yoon and his colleague received an order from their superiors. One was assigned to the Presidential Security Detail. The other one was assigned to the Intelligence Unit to investigate the flow of the president's secret funds. Just 3 months ago, a colleague received information that he was going abroad to investigate. It involved the death of the old president, which was presumed to be a homicide. However, because of this case, our colleague died tragically in a foreign country. No matter how much Do-yoon pleaded with them, they wouldn't listen. Eventually, the case was closed. Unable to accept the reality, Do-yoon quit his job. He quietly pursues the murderer of his colleague. The next day, Won-soo made it clear to her brother. She doesn't want to continue laundering money for her in-laws. She's going to run a charity organization. I didn't expect my brother to say no. He even left the office directly. Now Won-soo knows that there's no one she can trust. I don't know how the new guy, Do-yoon, is doing. In the afternoon, she went to her lover's house. She emphasized that she won't get a divorce. She was willing to pay a sum of money to let this shameless woman take her illegitimate child to live in Switzerland. However, the lover was not willing to do so, because Won-soo's son died. There is no legitimate person who can inherit the group. That's why the lover was unmoved by Won-soo's offer. In fact, Won-soo had already predicted this outcome. She said she wouldn't divorce and was ready to leave. But then the lover revealed a secret. It turned out that Won-soo's marriage to her husband was a conspiracy. At that time, she was pregnant and hid in Japan, and her husband got involved with an entertainer. The artiste woke up dead because of an overdose of anesthetic. If the news broke, it would be a sensation. Not to mention a fiancé who was in a strategic marriage. When the woman found out about the situation, she immediately withdrew from the marriage. It so happened that Won-soo's image was very good at that time. She climbed from the bottom to become a donor angel. So the husband had a chance encounter with Won-soo at the behest of his mother-in-law. The lover thought it was a shame that she was being used. Won-soo thought it hurt her pride to be a lover. At night, the husband suggested a chat. He emphasized that he loved Won-soo very much. At that moment, Won-soo's heart softened a bit. She suggested sending her lover and her child abroad. However, her husband was hesitant. Now she finally realized the true nature of her partner. On the other hand, her lover came to complain to her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law yelled at her for being useless. Then she said she would force Won-soo to get a divorce. The next morning, the family was preparing for a family photo shoot. When Won-soo arrived at the scene, she realized her lover's son was also sitting there. She involuntarily looked at her husband. Her husband looked unconcerned. At the same time, her lover looked smug. Won-soo was so angry that she turned around and left. She went to her mother-in-law's study to argue, but before she could speak, her mother-in-law threw a genetic test report on the table. She said it was her grandson, and reminded Won-soo that her son had passed away 5 years ago. She had followed her advice and kept it a secret until now, but sooner or later, the outside world will know. The mother-in-law wants Won-soo to treat her lover's son as her own son. Won-soo rejected this unreasonable request on the spot. Her mother-in-law advised her not to worry about other people's opinions. If she didn't agree, she could have another child. She didn't understand what was in her daughter-in-law's mind. What was in her mind? In the end, the family photo was taken with her lover's son. Do-yoon saw the complexity of the situation. The next day, Do-yoon was appointed security chief. He asked his seniors about the cause of the old chairman's death. He didn't expect him to be very excited. This made Do-yoon realize something was wrong, so he used his position to get a copy of the surveillance video. After a long scrutiny, he realized that the old chairman died in a place other than his home, so his colleague's death is someone's way of stopping him from investigating. The mother-in-law is using this scandal to force her daughter-in-law to divorce. She also wants her to hand over control of the organization. When Won-soo found out that her mother-in-law wanted to remove her from the board of directors, she asked her brother to tell the truth about her husband's mistress and child. Soon the media was all over the story. Then Won-soo held a live clarification conference to capitalize on the heat. Just when everyone was ready to watch the joke, she slowly walked up to the podium. As a wife, she promised that her husband had not cheated on her. Upon hearing this, the reporters on the stage criticized the situation. "How dare you deny the facts right in front of your eyes?" Won-soo told the press that the son was actually her father-in-law's. This move not only put the blame on her mother-in-law's head, and skillfully defused the scandal. Most importantly, it bought time to save the consortium. After the press conference, lover and her mother were frantic. They couldn't afford to miss out on their fortune, but there was nothing she could do about it. In the afternoon, her mother-in-law warned Won-soo, "Don't think everything will be fine just because you beat her today." She ordered her daughter-in-law to resign as the chairman of the Kaishan Group immediately. Won-soo reminded her that if she had to do that, she will hold another press conference. As the chairman, she'll expose the group's money laundering activities using the Cakeson group. In that case, even if she uses her connections, I'm afraid it will be difficult to suppress public opinion, so don't even think about the charity organization. Angrily, her mother-in-law warned Wonsu that everything that happens in the future is your own fault. A few days later, the lovers were brought home. Grandmother-in-law deliberately asked Wonsu to settle them down. Wonsu took her lover into her room. She warned her that her area of activity in the house was limited to this room. Don't even think about joining in at mealtimes. Act as if she doesn't exist. Don't let her see her anywhere else in the house. At night, Do-yoon protects Wonsu and runs away at night. In the end, he couldn't hold back his doubts. Curious, he asked her why she was so desperate to protect the consortium. It turns out that before his father-in-law died, he asked Wonsu to do one thing: don't get a divorce because of his grandson's death. Don't even think about it in the future. She was the only one he could trust, so in order to fulfill his promise, even if it means risking her own life. After hearing this, Do-yoon decided to tell Wonsu the truth. The old chairman didn't die at home. The murderer of her colleague is also targeting her, and it's in her house now. To be precise, it's the one who paid for the murder. The next day, in order to make things difficult for Wonsu, revealed that her birth mother is now locked up in a mental hospital. She could die at any time. As a daughter, shouldn't she visit her? Although she realized that her mother-in-law had ulterior motives. But Wonsu went to the mental hospital with her brother and Do-yoon. But before she could enter the ward, a scream came from inside. Wonsu's mom pleaded with her to forgive herself on her deathbed. Although she hid in the doghouse to avoid debts, no matter how much the debt collectors beat her daughter, she didn't dare to make a sound even when her face was bleeding. But Wonsu knew that her mom did it to save money for her ticket abroad. That's why she had the chance to get out of poverty and get ahead. But before she could say her forgiveness, the old lady took her last breath. Wonsu cries out in pain at the loss of her mother. Do-yoon thought there was an accident and rushed into the hospital room. When he realized the situation, he took her into his arms and held her in his arms. Not long after, his brother came in to inform. Wonsu's mother-in-law was worried that the public would find out, so she wouldn't allow public condolences. That night, Wonsu returned to the villa. She warned her mother-in-law that she had to see her mother off tomorrow. Of course, her mother-in-law wouldn't agree. If the media caught it, the stock price of the group would plummet, and there's a big business deal to discuss tomorrow. Grandma said if she doesn't see her tomorrow, she'll put both of them in a mental hospital, just like that dead mom. Here's a brief explanation. Wonsu has always been in charge of the project, so without her, it's basically over. That's why her mother-in-law is so overbearing. Of course, Do-yoon saw the unhappiness on Wonsu's face. After the negotiation, Wonsu was staring at her mother's ashes. She didn't want to let her loved ones be buried like this, so she came to Do-yoon's room. She asked for a ride to a place. Before they left, to avoid unnecessary trouble, Do-yoon removed the tracking device from the car. He asked Wonsu to turn off her cell phone. The two of them escaped from the villa. After the camera pans back to Wonsu's old house, Do-yoon pins the mourning hairpin on Wonsu's head. He himself tied a memorial band around his chest. But the house is still the same as before, but it's not as lively as before. Instead, it's more difficult to stop thinking about the deceased. Wonsu involuntarily squatted in front of the kennel, but her mother's words echoed in her ears. Before she knew it, it was already dusk. Stimulated by her mother's death, Wonsu opened her heart to Do-yoon. She admits that her son is dead, but to the outside world, she can only claim that he's in Switzerland. Do-yoon didn't know how to comfort her. He put his arm around Wonsu and didn't say anything, and Wonsu naturally leaned on his shoulder. Tears flowed out of his eyes. However, an unexpected accident happened. Their intimate behavior was all captured on camera by his men. They're still processing the ashes, and the photos are in the hands of the mother-in-law. At night, Do-yoon and Wonsu were called to the living room. The scumbag husband went up and punched Do-yoon. He yelled that he was going to fire him. Wonsu didn't say anything and went back to her room. But it's her mother-in-law who's so cunning. She ordered the security chief to go to her study. It turns out that the old lady knew that Wonsu wouldn't agree to fire Do-yoon, so she told the captain not to listen to her son. On the other hand, Wonsu went to Do-yoon's room. She wants to ask him to find the real murderer who's hiding in the house. At the same time, the mother-in-law called her son to the study. She revealed that Wonsu never agreed to divorce. She has a lot of evidence in her hand. If she reveals everything, then mother and son will have no right to run the business. So there's only one way out. That's to make Wonsu disappear from the world. On the other hand, Do-yoon showed Wonsu the surveillance of the old chairman's death. He told her in detail about his colleague's death. The two of them hit it off right away. Do-yoon secretly continued to track down the evidence. Wonsu continues to be the chairman of the corporation. In fact, Do-yoon has always had a suspect, the security chief who appeared in the surveillance camera, because he saw him when he was abroad, so he followed the clues left by his colleague. He intentionally left his face out of the 8-star gang. In less than an hour, his photo appeared on the security chief's cell phone. The next day, the captain used the photo to ask Yoon what the purpose of his visit to the group was. Do-yoon has no choice but to make it clear. He met the captain abroad when he was investigating his colleague's death. He suspected that he had something to do with his colleague's death and the old chairman's death. He only went abroad to launder money for his scumbag husband. How could he be a murderer? It's also true that the old chairman didn't die at home. That's because the cause of his death was a stroke. To cover up the scandal, the body had to be brought back to the villa. Do-yoon didn't believe it. The captain grabbed him. He thought Do-yoon was looking down on him. Anyway, the captain firmly stated that he was telling the truth, and he kindly reminded Do-yoon that he can investigate as much as he wants, but if anything goes wrong in the future, he won't be able to cover for him. Some people may think that Do-yoon is trying to scare people. He's using himself as bait. If there's a problem with the captain, he'll definitely go after him. The next day, when Won-soo was doing charity work, her secretary suddenly received a text message. She left on the pretext that there was something wrong with the organization. After the event, their car was attacked by a drone. The one who operated the drone to drop the bomb was the female bodyguard protecting the chairman. She came to the scene on her motorcycle. She saw that Won-soo wasn't breathing. Do-yoon was covered in blood and left in a hurry. Luckily, Do-yoon woke up from his coma. With his last ounce of strength, he yanked open the warped car door. He saved Won-soo before the car exploded. The debris from the explosion pierced Do-yoon's back. After confirming that Won-soo wasn't hurt, he gradually became unconscious and eventually fainted. They were soon rushed to the hospital. Due to the severity of Do-yoon's injuries, the operation lasted until midnight. The female bodyguard was always watching outside. I don't know how long it took for the operation to finish. The doctor informed the security chief. The operation was a success, but still need to closely monitor the condition of the injured. The female bodyguard overheard this. On the other hand, Won-soo has regained consciousness. Except for a few bruises, her life is not in danger. The first thing she said when she woke up was to ask how Yoon was doing. However, the scum husband reminded, the whole hospital is surrounded by reporters. If you don't want to be photographed, you'd better lie on the hospital bed honestly. Meanwhile, the female bodyguard distracted the nurse on duty. She was about to kill Do-yoon. He's the only one who took a look at Do-yoon. He just glanced at Do-yoon and left the room without saying a word. The female bodyguard who was about to do it again, she realized that there's a camera above her head. She can't make a move now. She then reported the assassination mission as a failure. The next day, the police chief was invited to the villa. His mother-in-law openly pressured him. She wanted to catch the real killer as soon as possible. Here's a detail. When the mother-in-law mentioned the shooting and the bomb, she deliberately looked at Mr. Han, who was next to her. After the mother-in-law finished lecturing the director, Mr. Han gave him a big red envelope. Then he kindly reminded him, failure to catch a criminal means incompetence. If you don't catch him, it means you have eyes. Every time Won-soo is attacked or assassinated, the company will drop 5 to 10 points. That's why the bombing must be solved as soon as possible. That director is also a veteran. He caught the meaning of the words right away. He said that he'll blame the real culprit on the US. On the other hand, Won-soo went to Do-yoon's hospital room, but she realized he wasn't there. In fact, Do-yoon used his connections. He got the surveillance video of the crime scene. The scumbag husband asked the captain to send 70 bundles of dollars again. The captain realizes that this guy is raising secret funds. It coincides with what Do-yoon said the other day. I can't help but mutter in my heart, is it possible that the death of his colleague is really related to the syndicate? In the afternoon, Won-soo was ready to leave the hospital, but before she left, she came to Do-yoon's hospital room. She scolded Do-yoon with a little bit of pain. Why were you so careless? It was only a centimeter away from puncturing your lung. Do-yoon replied that it was his heart that made her do it. At this moment, Won-soo's heart completely fell. The man in front of her who can give his life for her is worth cherishing. And Do-yoon also felt that emotion. He clutched her hand. They didn't say anything to each other. They snuggled up to each other. The next day, Won-soo asked her brother to hand over the account book again. This time, he confessed that there were 2 books. The one he had was altered since the day he became the head accountant of the organization. If anything went wrong, he would be the scapegoat. So no matter how much Won-soo tried to love him, brother just wouldn't hand them over. That night, my mother-in-law knocked on Secretary Han's door. In fact, the two of them have maintained this relationship for many years. Her son, the scum of the earth, had seen it all. As early as when he was very young, he asked his mother, "What if Dad knew?" But she replied that he already knew. Since childhood, the family's misfortune has brought a lot of influence to the scum man. He's secretly raising money, probably to deal with Mr. Han. A day later, Do-yoon returned to the office. The team leader came over to inform him. He once again sent cash for the scumbag. He reminded him that he's close to the old chairman. I don't think he's behind this. Now the mystery is getting deeper and deeper. The target of the mastermind is the foundation. Then why did he kill the chairman? Won-soo saw Do-yoon thinking. She came to his room at night. She revealed that the whole villa's surveillance system is in the housekeeper's room. There's one more thing I want to ask. Mr. Han has the account books of the consortium. But in the middle of his sentence, he saw that Do-yoon's body was still wrapped in gauze. He said he'd go back to his room first. In fact, Do-yoon had already guessed what Won-soo was thinking. He took her by the arm. The next day, when the housekeeper was counting the vegetables. Do-yoon sneaked into his room and saw on the surveillance camera that Mr. Han seemed to be going out. He always puts on lipstick before going out. Then Do-yoon came to his door. Unfortunately, he needed the code to enter the house. At that moment, his mother-in-law, Jaggedy, and Mr. Han are discussing about the project. The maid brought out 3 glasses of water. Do-yoon noticed that one of them had lipstick on it. It must be used by her mother-in-law. The second one has nothing on it. It's probably a scumbag's. As for the last cup, there's a colorless lipstick on the mouth, coupled with Lawyer Han's proclivity. I think this is the one. Do-yoon took the fingerprints immediately. Then the machine printed a fake fingerprint. He entered Mr. Han's apartment in no time. Unfortunately, the female bodyguard found him. It turns out she's loyal to Mr. Han, so she reported it immediately. When Mr. Han found out the details, he rushed to his home. But when he entered the house, no one was there. But he checked the desk and the safe. He was relieved to find nothing out of the ordinary. However, Mr. Han suddenly remembered a place. He immediately went to the shelf in the corner. He realized that the consortium's account book was missing. He was furious, but in a flash, he came up with a great idea. At the same time, Do-yoon brought the account book to Won-soo's office. Before the two of them had a chance to chat, the prosecutor rushed in with his men. He not only brought a search warrant and an emergency arrest warrant, he arrested Won-soo's brother for illegally appropriating the foundation's assets. It turns out that the person who reported the syndicate was his mother-in-law's second son. Counselor Han is furious that he's doing this, because the person arrested is the main artery of the organization. On the other hand, Won-soo was very anxious after the prosecution took her brother away. Do-yoon was sitting next to her, comforting her. He couldn't help but hold her hand. Her husband saw her in a hurry. After a while, Won-soo came to the interrogation room, but before she could say anything, brother told her not to worry. Then he put on a calm demeanor. He said that the lifeblood of the group was in his hands. At that moment, Mr. Han pushed the door in. Brother signaled with his eyes for Won-soo to leave first. In fact, he had already guessed his intentions. He stated that he would follow the instructions and accept the investigation, but he needs access to all the anonymous accounts under his name. Remind him that he has a list of all 550 accounts. After hearing this, Mr. Han thought it should be handled as soon as possible. Eventually, both sides came to an agreement. Early the next morning, Lawyer Han told his mother-in-law, brother Won-soo will take the blame for everything. He'll be released on bail by the syndicate. On the other hand, when Do-yoon looked through the books, Do-yoon was looking through the books and realized that the charity foundation's funds were all authorized by the same person, and that person is Won-soo's mother-in-law. At the same time, her mother-in-law called Won-soo in front of her. She questioned her about her relationship with that damn bodyguard. When her daughter-in-law refused to say anything, Mr. Han, the lawyer next to her, made it clear that the account book of the consortium was missing. Witnesses saw the bodyguard steal it. The mother-in-law then signaled. She put a photo of them hugging on the table. Won-soo had to admit that she ordered Do-yoon to steal it, and explained that they don't have that kind of relationship. Before her mother-in-law could scold her, Lawyer Han jumped in and said she understood her behavior. She asked Won-soo if Do-yoon is really trustworthy. He has the account book. He's definitely the one who's going to report him to the prosecution. Grandma suddenly said she wants to kill Do-yoon. Otherwise, Won-soo's brother will go to jail. Grandma is getting more and more angry. She scolded Won-soo for being obsessed by a man. She said that she received the photos a long time ago. She thought her daughter-in-law was just playing around and thought she'd stop once she'd had enough. Just don't let others know about this trivial matter. She didn't realize that her daughter-in-law was actually working with an outsider to steal the account book. Lawyer Han reminded Won-soo. Won-soo's brother was raised by him, so there's no way he can betray the organization, and the group won't let them down either. After all, we're all family here. He didn't know what kind of trickery Do-yoon used to get Won-soo to instigate her to steal the account books. After hearing these words, Won-soo's heart was wondering. It's true that the situation is as Lawyer Han said, so she had to verify the truth. After Won-soo left, Mr. Han promised to take care of the matter. At night, Won-soo asked Do-yoon to meet her on the rooftop. She wants him to prove that the assassin is the same person who killed her friend, or return the account book. Do-yoon told Won-soo that he studied the account book carefully. The actual situation may be different from what he thought. All the secret funds were eventually transferred to his mother-in-law's name. We haven't found out the exact reason yet. After hearing the details, she wanted to take the blame for everything. I didn't expect Do-yoon to stop her. He said that as long as he has the books, he won't dare to do anything. But Won-soo was worried about Do-yoon's life. Do-yoon replied that he would protect himself, and he'll save Won-soo from hell at the same time. At the same time, his lover was not favored. She plotted something with her mom. The next day, the news reports that the syndicate is suspected of embezzling assets. Worried that the syndicate would be implicated, so she asked Mr. Han for a solution. Mr. Han proposed to publicize Won-soo's cheating on her bodyguard, so that the donor angel would automatically give up his position as a director of the consortium. That would kill two birds with one stone. In fact, the reason why Mr. Han did this. It's because the old chairman had his will notarized abroad before he died. No one knows what it says, but the only clue points to the charity foundation. That's why Wonsu has to be eliminated. In the afternoon, Wonsu and Do-yoon were assigned by their mother-in-law to do charity work in the Busan district. Unbeknownst to them, the female bodyguard is also secretly following them. She got an order from Mr. Han. She was instructed by Mr. Han to kill Wonsu as soon as she caught evidence of her infidelity. Then she blames her bodyguard, Do-yoon. At night, the two of them stayed at the villa arranged by the group without knowing anything. The strange thing is that all the security guards were removed except Do-yoon. At the same time, the female bodyguard took the key photo. She took advantage of Do-yoon's patrol. She was ready to kill Wonsu during Do-yoon's patrol. Luckily, Do-yoon showed up just in time. He told Wonsu to escape through the window. He stayed behind to take care of the female bodyguard. Then, Do-yoon fought with the bodyguard. Do-yoon almost fought for his life to get even with his opponent. He kicked the female bodyguard into the fast-flowing water. Do-yoon was afraid that there were other assassins, so he held on to his weak body. He drove the boat to a safe place. The next day rolled around. Wonsu woke up the weak Do-yoon. She was worried about Do-yoon's injuries, and Do-yoon was concerned if she was hurt. He promised to protect Wonsu. Then they kissed each other. On the other hand, Wonsu's husband came to the villa, but he didn't see his wife. The camera turns and Wonsu rolls over in her sleep. She puts her hand on her husband's leg. It's been a long time since the husband and wife have made such a light gesture. The husband didn't know whether to be happy or angry. Happy about his wife's sudden change of personality. Angry that she might really be having an affair with the bodyguard. At noon, Wonsu and her husband attended an interview for a donation. On the surface, they look like a very loving couple. In fact, Wonsu cares more about Do-yoon, who is guarding her. Earlier when she was treating his wound, although I could guess that he might be injured in the fight, but when she really saw the scars, Wonsu was still shocked. The old wounds plus the new wounds each stabbed her in the heart. Do-yoon guessed that his favorite person would blame himself, so he took Wonsu's hand. He said that he saw the killer's habit of movement, because the account book was in his hands, so he was the target of the assassination. He assumed that he must be the one who needed the account book, so he asked Wonsu to think about it. If he dies, who will inherit the foundation? Wonsu went back to her brother-in-law most likely, but as far as she knows, he's not on good terms with her mother-in-law. He doesn't seem to know about the secret fund. There's one more thing that Do-yoon doesn't understand. Lawyer Han is the right hand of her mother-in-law, so why is the compilation of black accounts being blamed on her? So Do-yoon asked Wonsu to ask her husband 2 questions, in order to narrow down the scope of the murder investigation. Wonsu asked her husband if her brother-in-law was an illegitimate child. When she heard that, her husband's expression changed significantly. It seems that the rumor of a bastard son is not a fabrication. It just proves why her mother-in-law hates her second son. Do-yoon told her another question about the old chairman's death. Then Wonsu asked her husband if her father was murdered. Through her husband's state, it's basically certain that he knows the cause of his father's death. At the same time, the mother-in-law ordered Lawyer Han to publicize her daughter-in-law's infidelity. She wants to get rid of Wonsu and her siblings even if she has to fabricate evidence. In addition, Mr. Han investigated. Do-yoon was working as a bodyguard to investigate his colleague's death. The dead colleague was investigating the death of the old chairman. Then he reminds his mother-in-law that if Wonsu dies, the secret funds left behind by the old chairman can be distributed appropriately. In the afternoon, the news of Wonsu's infidelity was exposed. Wonsu's husband was furious and approached his mother. He asked her why she did it, but she explained that she did it because you suspected it. As for the photos, she was worried that Wonsu wouldn't get a divorce. That's why she did it in secret. The husband warned the mother that his wife was not a dirty person, and he won't get a divorce himself. As his own mother, the mother-in-law couldn't understand. Why did her son go against her? She didn't realize that her son was obsessed with what happened back then. He couldn't forget his mother's game with Mr. Han. As a result, mother and son had a big fight over it. Anyway, her husband loves Wonsu with all his heart. He won't allow anyone to hurt her, not even his own mother. It so happened that her lover overheard her impassioned speech. That night she took her son and left the villa with determination. She felt suffocated by someone who didn't love her. That night, Do-yoon sneaked into Mr. Han's house. He planted a hidden camera in the clock last time. He happened to capture the combination of the safe. There were many documents and certificates inside. Do-yoon accidentally found one of them. In one of the documents, Han had entrusted all his assets to his mother-in-law's second son. He realized right away. The second son is Lawyer Han's biological son. At night, her husband sent someone to take Do-yoon to the basement. He took a shotgun and put it to his head. He asked Do-yoon how far he'd gotten with Wonsu. Do-yoon told him that he had a clear conscience. Then he recounted the whole story. He reminded his husband that the old chairman was killed by one of his own, and his colleague's death is the best proof. But the husband got more and more agitated. He wanted to shoot Do-yoon to death. Wonsu rushed to the basement at that critical moment, but Do-yoon told her to calm down. Then Wonsu pointed the gun at herself. The husband never thought that his beloved would take a bullet for the bodyguard. His faith collapsed in an instant. The husband asked Wonsu if the bodyguard loved her too. He advised her to come to her senses. In the end, this soldier of pure love put down his gun. He was still in love with his wife, Woo Won-soo. 2 weeks later, the lawyer commissioned by the old chairman arrived in South Korea. She read the will in front of all the family members. The illegal funds that my father-in-law acquired during his lifetime, totaling 18 trillion won. All of it will be handed over to his daughter-in-law's charitable organization. The mother-in-law and her youngest son, who couldn't inherit the money, had a bad idea. At first, he suggested that the mother and son share the money equally. He didn't realize that his mother-in-law didn't consider him family. She said that the eldest son would inherit the company in the future, so he had to keep all the illegal money. Naturally, the youngest son didn't want to do it. The eldest son, who had been silent for a long time, warned his younger brother. He's nothing more than a bird in the hand, and revealed that his father's death was not an accident, but an accident. At these words, the younger son's expression became visibly tense, though he had lost the battle. But he warned his elder brother, if he doesn't pay half of the price, he would tell the whole story of what mother and son had done. A few days later, Won-soo brought the illegal funds back to the country. The accompanying Do-yoon accidentally realized. Do-yoon noticed that the female bodyguard's walking style is exactly the same as the murderer of his colleague. He's a little more wary of this person. Meanwhile, when his mother-in-law found out about Won-soo's return, she suggested to Mr. Han to use Won-soo's brother to get him to clean up the illegal funds. That way, the daughter-in-law won't be able to get away with it. Then buy the shares of the group in the name of the eldest son. Then we'll use some simple tricks to get him to inherit. When that's done, we'll charge Chun-soo's brother with favoritism. After hearing her mother-in-law's plan, Mr. Han looked very frustrated because his son didn't get any of it. In fact, her mother-in-law saw her little mind. She yelled that the father and son were servants like beggars. They should be thankful for what they got. She also wanted to hinder her eldest son's career. On the other hand, Won-soo, her brother and Do-yoon are discussing a countermeasure plan. Do-yoon investigates that the youngest son is actually born to Mr. Han and his mother-in-law. It is assumed that he was unable to inherit the group's property. That's why he's targeting the syndicate. He's the one who's behind Won-soo's death, and lawyer Han is helping him for his son's sake. It turns out that the old chairman was killed by his youngest son with a gold brick. Mr. Han rushed to the scene at once. After analyzing the scene, he instructed his son to create an alibi. Then he put a wind in the old chairman's sails. 3 days later, according to the original plan, Won-soo's brother finished laundering the illegal funds. He met with Mr. Han under the bridge. Do-yoon secretly recorded their conversation. However, Mr. Han was very careful. No matter how much he tried to persuade him, he'll never be able to keep his answers straight. Just when Do-yoon thought the plan had failed, an assassin suddenly appeared and slashed Won-soo's throat. He immediately took out his dagger and chased after him, and stabbed the assassin in the left shoulder. Do-yoon suddenly realized that Won-suk might die if he went after him, so he took him to the hospital immediately. However, because he lost too much blood, he couldn't be saved. A few days later, at Won-soo's funeral, sister-in-law suddenly handed over a flash drive because Won-soo's brother told her, if anything happens to him, he must give it to Seo Do-yoon. Then Do-yoon put the flash drive into lawyer Han's safe. He hoped that his sister-in-law would report the syndicate to the prosecutor. The next day rolled around. The prosecutor arrested her mother-in-law on the charge of unlawful misappropriation of the syndicate's funds, and Mr. Seo started to set up a plan the moment his son couldn't get a share of the property. However, when the prosecutor was searching Mr. Han's house, the female bodyguard suddenly appeared. When she saw Do-yoon, she turned around and ran outside. When Do-yoon saw her, he immediately chased after her. After a fierce fight, he was sure that the female bodyguard was the assassin who killed his colleague and the chairman, so he handed her over to the police. Then Do-yoon went straight to Mr. Han. He warned him that it's hard for the bodyguard to defend herself against the evidence. Soon she'll give up who's behind the murder. But Mr. Han emphasized on the fact that it's defamation to make a pointless assumption. If you can do anything, just do it. In a flashback, Mr. Han dug up the gold brick that killed the chairman in the backyard, and then she visits her mother-in-law who's being interrogated. He explains that he framed her for revenge. She doesn't understand why he wanted to have a child with her, so it was revenge. Then Mr. Han took out the gold brick and put it on the table. He threatened to change the murderer to the mother-in-law. After all, the brick was stained with her husband's blood, and the fingerprints were her youngest son's. Granny didn't realize until now. She never realized how scary the butler lawyer was. The secretary soon got the news. Granny confessed to the murder. That night, her youngest son returned to the villa with nothing. First, he dismissed all the servants. Then he killed his elder brother in a fit of pique. Won-soo, who was returning from a trip, happened to see him. At the end of the story, Mr. Han, just like last time, he blamed Won-soo for the crime, but he didn't realize that his son didn't escape. Do-yoon found him right away. He was handed over to the police, based on the evidence left by Won-soo's brother, and the mother-in-law's realization. They found evidence that Mr. Han abetted and paid for the murder. Good has its reward and evil has its retribution.